I hadn't even finished my presentation when Mark Reeves, the new CEO, cut me off. I stood there, still holding the clicker in my hand, as Mark, his voice flat as ever, announced that the company was restructuring. And oh yeah, I was being pushed out of my role as Chief Operations Officer. Officially a transition, but everyone knew what it meant. He said it like it was just business, no big deal. He talked about a new direction for the company, a faster, more agile leadership style that didn't fit with my conservative approach. It felt like a slap in the face, but I couldn't show it. I stayed calm, like I was supposed to, and nodded along as he droned on. My eyes flickered over the room, watching my team. The people who'd been with me through the ups and downs, through all the long hours and last-minute solutions. Some of them looked confused, others like they couldn't quite hide their sympathy. But I didn't care about them right then. I knew what was happening. Mark wasn't just changing the company, he was cutting off the people who built it, starting with me. I stayed composed, professional, but inside, I was already 2 steps ahead. I grabbed my briefcase slowly, as if it was just another Tuesday. I didn't let the weight of it settle in my chest. No, I was too focused on what came next. Mark had been gloating up there, acting like this was a victory. But what he didn't know was that his biggest mistake was thinking I was out of options. I told myself I wasn't being fired, just repositioned for something bigger. It wasn't hard to see the writing on the wall. Mark had been with the company for less than 6 months, but he was already pushing everything in a new direction. He was an outsider, a venture capital guy, not someone who'd built anything from the ground up. He didn't get why we'd grown the way we had. Slow, steady, deliberate, and he sure as hell didn't respect it. I started noticing the little things. His dismissive attitude in meetings, the way he'd undermine my strategies. But the real tipping point came one morning when I overheard something I shouldn't have. I was walking past Mark's assistant's desk when I caught the tail end of a conversation. She was making plans to meet with Chronocore Systems, the company's largest vendor, the one I'd personally developed a relationship with over the last few years. My gut twisted. I wasn't supposed to be left out of those talks. Mark had been quietly phasing me out of the negotiations, probably because he didn't think I was agile enough for his big plans. He was trying to take over, sideline me, make sure he could pull the strings without me in the picture, but I wasn't some pawn to be pushed aside. I wasn't going down that easily. I called up Tony, an old buddy from college who'd gone into private equity. He was sharp, too sharp to get stuck in anything small, but I had a hunch he'd be willing to take a swing if the deal was right. I laid out the situation. Chronocore was struggling financially, and if we acted fast, we could buy them out. The acquisition would give me leverage, but I needed to keep it under wraps. Mark couldn't know. Tony agreed, but I knew this was going to be delicate. I didn't want to spook anyone, so I set up a shell company to shield my identity. It was clean, quiet, a slow-moving machine. I'd already been quietly buying up Chronocore's shares for weeks, piecing the puzzle together until I had enough control to make a serious play, just before Mark pushed me out. I wasn't just thinking about my position within Techline anymore. I was thinking bigger. The more I thought about it, the more I realized. Mark's vision was short-sighted. His push to rewrite everything was going to cause more cracks than he could cover up. His so-called fast-paced approach, it was going to implode the second anything hit a bump. I didn't take it personally when Mark had me removed. Hell, I'd seen it coming. But now I had a plan, one that was already set in motion. While Mark was out there patting himself on the back, thinking he was shaking up the system, I was quietly holding all the cards. The morning after I left the company felt like any other. Well, almost. I sat in my apartment, coffee in hand, staring at the screen. The email from HR was waiting for me, a cold, robotic thing, like they'd sent it to 100 people in the past. Please complete the transition checklist. It felt impersonal, efficient, like they were ticking a box. Mark had requested I draft a knowledge transfer document for my replacement, as if I hadn't built the systems from the ground up. It was almost laughable, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to give them anything more than they needed. I opened a blank document and started typing. The process was methodical. I'd give them everything they needed, detailed outlines of operational workflows, project timelines, even a few trade secrets, but I wasn't a fool. I left out critical pieces, small but important details that would make the company dependent on the very vendor they'd pushed me out of, the vendor I now controlled. Techline wouldn't be able to function without Chronocore's proprietary data modules. They wouldn't be able to finish their AI project. The timeline they'd set up, it was all based on Chronocore's deliveries, and without the info I'd just conveniently left out, the whole thing would crumble. I was already smiling to myself when my phone buzzed. Michelle. I answered on the first ring. "What's up? Jake, we've got a problem," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Techline's junior procurement manager is asking a lot of questions about the new delivery schedule with Chronocore. They're starting to notice something's off. I leaned back, fingers gripping my coffee mug, watching the steam curl. I figured it wouldn't take long. Mark's whole strategy is based on ignoring the foundation. He's trying to build a house on sand. Michelle exhaled through the phone, a mix of frustration and admiration. Techline's in trouble. Without that data, their AI project's dead in the water. The one Mark's so invested in. They're going to have to come to you soon. You need to be ready. I wasn't surprised. This was the domino effect I'd been expecting. Mark had wanted to push me out. But what he hadn't realized was that by doing so, he'd set a series of events into motion, a chain reaction that would cripple his entire plan. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The morning light had already started to filter through the buildings, casting long shadows across the street. It felt like everything was lining up perfectly, just as I'd intended. "Don't worry," I said to Michelle, my voice steady. "I'm already ahead of them. Mark won't know what hit him." I paused for a second, letting that sink in. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about power. Mark had underestimated me, and now it was time to watch his house of cards fall apart. Techline's supply chain was about to become a massive problem, and I was holding all the pieces. It didn't take long for things to start unraveling. I was sitting at my desk, going over some final details with Michelle when I got the first sign. My phone buzzed, an email from Chronocore's legal team. They were sending over a new licensing agreement for Techline, my licensing agreement, and not just any agreement, an exclusive one, with terms that favored me, not them. I couldn't help but smile. Mark had been so sure that his new direction would be smooth sailing. But now, Chronocore's new ownership structure was starting to hit Techline like a freight train. I'd planned it that way. I'd wanted it to hit them hard. When Mark's team saw the email from Chronocore, I could only imagine the panic that set in. They had to know something had changed, something big, and they had no idea who was behind it. Sure enough, not even an hour later, I got a call from Clara. She used to be my colleague at Techline, back when we actually worked together on projects. I could tell something was off the second I answered. "Jake," she said, her voice shaky, "we've got a major problem on our hands. The AI project is on the brink of collapse. We're not getting the data we need from Chronocore, and Mark's spinning it like it's just another supply chain hiccup. But I know it's bigger than that. It's the vendor, isn't it?" I took a breath. "You've got the picture, Clara. Mark's been pushing everything, thinking it's all about speed and efficiency. But what he didn't count on was the vendor dependency he was walking straight into." She was quiet for a second, but I could hear the frustration in her voice when she spoke again. "I don't get it. Why the hell would they stop supporting us like this?" I leaned back in my chair, spinning the phone between my fingers. "You know as well as I do, they've got a new owner now, and that owner, well, let's just say he's not so interested in keeping things the way Mark wants them." Clara sighed, a heavy sound that told me everything I needed to know. "Mark's starting to figure it out. He's suspicious, Jake. He knows something's off, but he's not connecting the dots yet. It's like he's scrambling." I stayed quiet, keeping my cool. Let him scramble. He's not even close to understanding the full picture yet. I could feel the shift in the conversation, like Clara was weighing something heavy in her mind. She hesitated before asking, "What's your next move?" I smiled. "That's the fun part. I'm not going to move, not yet. I'm going to let him dig himself deeper." After the call, Michelle pinged me with an update. "Jake, Mark's team is circling the wagons. They're talking damage control, but they're still completely in the dark about why Chronocore is suddenly acting this way." "Good," I said, watching the screen. "Let them waste their energy. It won't matter soon." Later that day, I finally got the phone call I'd been expecting. The email from Chronocore had stirred the pot, and Mark was calling for answers. I answered the phone, the familiar tension building in my chest. "Jake, we need to talk." "Something's not right with Chronocore." Mark's voice was clipped, his frustration obvious. "They've changed their licensing terms, and now you're at the center of it. What's going on?" I leaned back, biting down on a grin. "Well, Mark, it seems like the company you've been running into the ground has a new direction, and I guess it's one you didn't see coming." There was a long silence on the other end. I knew he was piecing it together, realizing that the control he thought he had was slipping through his fingers. "You're behind this," he said, more of a statement than a question. "Yep," I replied, "and now you're going to have to play by my rules. Hope you're ready for that." I hung up before he could respond, the weight of everything I'd set in motion settling in. Mark might think he's the one in charge, But the truth was, he was already out of the loop. And soon enough, he'd realize just how deep he was in it. Mark's downfall was just beginning, and I was the one holding the pieces. The tech world didn't take long to catch on. Within a day, headlines were blaring about Techline's supply chain crisis. The AI project was teetering on the edge of collapse. And guess who was at the center of it all? Me and Chronocore. I had a lot of unread emails, but one caught my attention. It was from Techline's legal department. They were finally making their move, asking to discuss new licensing terms for Chronocore. They were in full damage control mode, trying to play it cool, but I knew what they were really after. The email had that corporate tone, formal but desperate. They wanted to renegotiate the terms of the deal. They wanted to come to the table, but what they didn't know was that I'd already set my price. I tapped my fingers against the desk, glancing over the email once more. Mark thought he could steamroll me. Now it was time for him to see just how wrong he was. I didn't even hesitate. I shot a quick text to Michelle, asking her to draft a response. When she called back, I gave her the instructions. "Tell them the terms are non-negotiable," I said, my voice steady, the edge of control sharp in my tone. "They either pay my fees or watch their project burn. No middle ground." Michelle hesitated for a second. "Jake, these terms are steep. They're going to fight it." "Let them," I replied. "They've got no choice. Without Chronocore's proprietary modules, they can't finish the AI project. That's a fact. They'll come to me. It's just a matter of when." I could feel the tension rising on the other end of the line as she processed the weight of what I was saying. "All right, I'll handle it." She was gone before I could say anything else. But the reality of it hit me. It wasn't just about Techline anymore. The pressure was already building on Mark. He was scrambling, trying to manage a crisis he couldn't fix. I could see him trying to keep his cool, his fingers gripping the edges of his desk as he fought to control a company that was slipping from his hands. The cracks were everywhere. He was beginning to realize just how much he'd underestimated me. Hours later, the email came back, signed by Mark's team. They were willing to talk, but it was clear they didn't like the terms. I didn't need to read between the lines to know that they were feeling the heat. They had no other option. Michelle called me again, this time with a sense of urgency in her voice. "Jake, they're already trying to negotiate. Mark wants to meet in person, but he's pushing for a discount." I didn't even flinch. "Tell him no," I said coolly. "The price stays the same. If he wants the data, he pays. Simple as that." I felt that rush of satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how to play the game. Mark had been riding high, thinking he could disrupt the system. But now, the table had turned. The company was desperate, and I was the one with the leverage. It wasn't just about getting paid. It was about power. Mark's leadership was crumbling, and I could feel it. It didn't take long for the walls to start closing in on Mark. The board, which had been quiet up until now, finally took action. They called for a full audit of Techline's vendor dependencies. It was clear they were starting to connect the dots. And with every passing day, Mark's attempts to deflect blame only made things worse. "Jake, it's getting bad," Clara said when she called me, her voice tense. "The board's losing patience. Mark's trying to blame everything on market volatility, but they're not buying it anymore. They've brought in outside auditors to dig into the supply chain mess." He's starting to crack. I leaned back in my chair, the edges of my lips curling into a slow grin. Market volatility? He was trying to spin it like this was some sort of global disaster, but the reality was so much simpler. He had ignored the people who had actually built the company, and now it was falling apart in real time. "It's worse than that," Clara continued. "Mark's behavior is becoming erratic. He's lashing out at everyone. The team's starting to lose faith in him. I could picture it clearly. Mark walking around the office with that forced confidence of his, all the while trying to keep his hands from shaking. The pressure was building, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "You've been hearing what the auditors are saying?" I asked, more to get a sense of how deep this was going. "I've been hearing rumors. They're focusing on the vendor situation, how Chronocore has suddenly pivoted and stopped supporting Techline the way they were. It's obvious the relationship's broken, but they're still trying to figure out why it happened so quickly." "Yeah," I said, rubbing my thumb against the edge of my phone. "They're not going to figure that one out." The thing was, it wasn't just Mark who was in trouble. Techline's public image was in freefall. I could see the headlines now. Techline faces critical supply chain crisis. AI project in jeopardy. People were starting to question Mark's leadership, and it was only a matter of time before the board made their move. I had my own role to play in this, but for now, I kept my distance. The longer I stayed out of it, the more desperate Techline became. By the time I checked my email later that afternoon, I had a new message waiting for me. It was from the board of directors at Techline, marked confidential. I felt a small knot tighten in my stomach, but I opened it anyway. The message was brief, but the meaning was clear. We would like to schedule a confidential meeting to discuss how you can assist in resolving the current issues caused by recent leadership decisions. I couldn't help but chuckle. Leadership decisions. It was just a nice way of saying, help us clean up the mess Mark made. I read the email again, savoring the taste of their desperation. I shot a quick text to Michelle, letting her know about the meeting request. She knew this moment was coming. The board was scared enough to reach out to me, someone they'd never expected to be in a position of power. I had the upper hand now, no question about it. Mark had no idea how much of his fate rested in my hands. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was my time. Techline was on the brink of a massive collapse, and I was the only one who could help them fix it, but only if it was on my terms. I smiled to myself, thinking about Mark's impending fall. He'd played the game hard, but in the end, it was always the people behind the scenes, people like me, who controlled the board, and now the board was asking me for help. Things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. When I walked into the boardroom at Techline, it wasn't like I expected it to be. The tension in the room was thick, like they were all just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Richard Alvarez, the chairman of the board, greeted me with that stiff business smile of his. "Jake, thank you for coming," he said, his voice cool but polite. "We recognize that the company's leadership mishandled this situation, and we're here to talk about how we can fix it." I didn't nod. I didn't need to pretend. They knew exactly what had happened, and I knew they weren't here out of politeness. They were desperate. We all sat down around the sleek conference table. Richard started with the usual pleasantries, but I could feel the weight of everything hanging between us. It wasn't just business now. It was about power, and they knew they'd lost it. I let the silence stretch a moment before I spoke. "You want me to help you fix your mess, Richard?" I said, leaning forward, my voice low. "Let's start with the basics. Techline's problem isn't just a supply chain issue. It's a failure to understand long-term stability." Richard's eyes tightened, but he stayed quiet. He knew where I was going. "Mark thought he could blow everything up. Go fast, go big, right?" I continued. "But the thing is, you can't build a house on sand." And that's exactly what he did. He pushed out the people who understood the company's foundations, people like me, who saw the value in slow, steady growth. And now you're paying for it. There was a shift in the room, a subtle acknowledgement that they knew the truth, even if they didn't want to hear it. Mark's removal wasn't just inevitable, I added. It was a matter of when. He never understood the vendor dependency, and he ignored the long-term strategy. His whole vision for Techline was based on speed and disruption. But guess what? It doesn't work when you've built your business on relationships, on trust. Richard cleared his throat. "We understand your role in Techline's past successes, Jake, and we're not blind to the fact that Mark's approach was flawed. But there it was, that little hesitation. They weren't willing to admit everything. They weren't ready to give me a full apology. That's fine. I wasn't here for a sorry. Instead, Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. What we're prepared to offer is a strategic partnership. We know you're in a unique position now, with Chronocore under your control. If you're willing to help us recover, we'll make it worth your while." I didn't flinch. The offer wasn't a surprise. They were begging for my help, and they were willing to give me everything I wanted to get it. I let the silence hang for a moment before I replied. "I'll help you, but it'll be on my terms. You'll pay for the data modules and you'll let me steer the course with the vendor. No more of Mark's quick fixes." Richard nodded. "Agreed, but we need to move quickly." I stood up, feeling the power settle around me like a cloak. "You'll move at my pace," I said. "You can either trust me or watch everything fall apart." I left the room with a sense of closure, not because I'd gotten everything I wanted, but because I'd finally shaped the deal the way it should have been all along. Techline needed me. They'd come to me when it was clear Mark couldn't fix it. I wasn't interested in running Techline. I didn't need to take it over. But I'd secured something far more valuable, the respect I'd been denied, and a lucrative partnership that would keep me in control of the very thing Techline couldn't survive without.